After my son saw my broken arm and refused to help, he sneered. "Buy your own food, Dad. Stop depending on us." His wife added, "You're not our responsibility anymore." I said nothing and walked away. Weeks later, they held a luxury rare book auction using my 32 years of expertise. But when the first buyer exposed the truth, everyone went silent. My son froze, realizing he had stolen the wrong man's legacy, and there was no way to give it back. So glad to have you at Dad's Revenge Stories. Tell me in the comments, which country or city are you watching this? From Quick Note, this story incorporates some fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Resemblances to actual names or locations are strictly coincidental, but the message speaks for itself. Every morning begins the same way: the smell of engine oil, the chill of a Columbus winter still clinging to the garage walls even in August, and the particular kind of quiet that belongs only to a man who has learned over 60 years of living not to expect anyone to notice him. I pulled on my jacket slowly, the way I did everything these days. 60 years old, and my body had started keeping score. My knees reminded me of every staircase I had ever taken too fast. My lower back filed a formal complaint every time I bent to lift a package. But I kept moving, because moving was the only thing I knew how to do when the house got too quiet. The garage was small, barely enough room for my delivery van, and a second-hand workbench I never used for actual work. In the corner, wedged between a rusted toolbox and a cardboard box, I kept telling myself I would sort through, sat a wooden bookshelf. 6 shelves. Maybe 40 books total. The last survivors of a collection that had once filled an entire storefront on 5th Street. I ran my hand along the spines the way a man touches an old scar. Not because it hurts anymore, but because forgetting it entirely feels like its own kind of dishonesty. Still talking to those books, Walt? I turned around. My neighbor, Frank Delacroix, was leaning over the chain-link fence that separated our driveways, holding a mug of coffee with both hands the way retired men do when they have nowhere urgent to be. "Just checking on them," I said. Frank squinted at the shelf. "You ever think about selling those? Some of them look old. Probably worth something." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice level. "They're worth something to me. That's enough." Frank shrugged the way people do when they don't understand something, but are too polite to say so. "Big day today." 42 stops. I picked up my delivery bag and slung it over my shoulder. "Usual." "You know," Frank said, swirling his coffee, "my son-in-law's company is hiring office coordinators. Desk job. Benefits. You've got more experience than half those kids applying." I smiled at him, the patient kind of smile I had spent years perfecting. "I appreciate that, Frank, but I like the road." He looked at me the way people looked at old men who did physical labor, part admiration, part pity, mostly confusion. "Your call, Walt. Stay safe out there." I climbed into the van and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Through the windshield, I could see the bookshelf through the open garage door. The morning light hit the spines at an angle that made the gold lettering on a few of them catch and glow. 32 years I had spent inside the walls of Hayes Rare Books on 5th Street. 32 years of tracking down first editions, authenticating signatures, building relationships with collectors in 14 states. I knew the smell of genuine aged paper the way a surgeon knows the difference between tissue types, by touch, by instinct, by years of handling things carefully enough to understand their value. Then Margaret got sick, and the medical bills started coming. And Ethan, my boy, 28 years old and already over his head in a business that was failing, needed help I could not give him from behind a store counter. So I sold it. Every shelf, every catalog, every relationship I had spent 3 decades building. I sold the whole thing and told myself it was the right call. I still believed it was the right call. I just tried not to think about it before noon. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. Columbus in August was golden and loud construction crews on every other block, teenagers on bicycles cutting through crosswalks, the particular chaos of a mid-sized American city trying to get somewhere before the heat peaked. I had driven these routes long enough that my hands knew the turns before my brain did. The morning deliveries went smoothly. A box of kitchen appliances to a young couple in German village who argued cheerfully at the door about where to put them. A medical supply package to an elderly woman on Bryden Road who asked me to set it inside because her hip was acting up, and I said yes because that's what you do. A crate of auto parts to a garage on Parsons Avenue where the mechanic shook my hand, like I had done him a personal favor. Nobody asked my name. Nobody asked what I had done before this. To them, I was the man in the brown jacket with the delivery scanner part of the city's machinery, necessary and invisible in equal measure. I had made my peace with that, mostly. By 2 in the afternoon, I was sitting in the van outside a deli on High Street, eating a turkey sandwich and reviewing my afternoon manifest on the scanner. 20 more stops. Routine. I scrolled through the addresses the way I always did, mentally mapping the most efficient route, old habit from the days when I used to plan buying trips across the Midwest, tracking down estate sales and private collections. Then I stopped scrolling. One address on the afternoon list made my hand go still over the screen. Not because the street was unfamiliar, not because the delivery was unusual, because the name on the recipient field was one I knew better than my own reflection. Hayes E. 4412 Briarwood Court, Ethan's address, and the sender was listed as a vendor account. I didn't recognize something called Meridian Collectibles, LLC. I set the scanner down on the passenger seat. I picked up the second half of my sandwich, then put it down too. Outside, a city bus rumbled past, shaking the van slightly. A woman on the sidewalk laughed at something on her phone, loud and sudden. I sat with the name on that screen for a long moment. Ethan had never mentioned ordering anything through a business account. And Meridian Collectibles, in 32 years of working in rare books, I had never heard that name. I started the engine. I told myself it was probably nothing. I had spent enough years in this business to know that the word probably does a lot of heavy lifting when a person does not want to know the answer to a question they have already started asking. I pulled back into traffic and headed for Briarwood Court. Briarwood Court was the kind of street that tried hard to look like it had always been prosperous. The houses were newer construction brick facades with two-car garages and decorative shutters that had never actually shut anything, and the lawns were the particular shade of green that required professional maintenance and a lot of money pretending it was effortless. I had delivered to this street 3 times before. Each time I noticed the same thing. Everything on Briarwood Court was designed to make you feel like the people inside it had made it. I parked the van in front of number 4412 and sat for a moment with the engine running. The package was in the back, a flat rectangular box roughly 24 inches by 16, sealed with brown packing tape and stamped fragile on 3 sides. Meridian Collectibles, LLC. Recipient E. Hayes. I climbed out and pulled the package from the back of the van. It was lighter than I expected for its size. That was the first thing. I was carrying it up the front walk when I felt it a slight shift in weight, a faint sound from inside the box. Something had come loose. One corner of the packing tape had started to peel back, the adhesive weakened by the August heat, and a seam along the top of the box had opened maybe half an inch. I stopped walking. The seam along the top of the box had separated almost entirely. The August heat had done its work on the adhesive, and the flap had curled back enough that the contents were partially visible without any effort on my part. A delivery driver is required by company protocol to inspect visibly damaged packaging before completing a drop. I set the package down on the front porch railing and looked. What I saw made the back of my throat go dry. Inside the box, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and secured with foam padding, were 2 books. The tissue paper had shifted during transit, leaving both covers exposed. A claimed first edition of a Hemingway collection, 1926. And what appeared to be a signed copy of a Steinbeck novel, 1937, with a certificate of authenticity lying loose beside it, face up, fully legible. I had held genuine copies of both in my hands at various points in my career. I knew what they were supposed to look like. These were not that. The paper color on the Hemingway was wrong. Genuine books from that era have a specific amber tone, a warmth that comes from decades of natural oxidation. These pages were too uniform, too pale, the kind of color you get when someone artificially ages paper with tea staining or chemical treatment and gets the ratio slightly off. The binding on the Steinbeck had a stiffness that no book from 1937 would still carry. Old bindings loosen and flex with age. They do not hold their original tension like something manufactured last year. And the signature on the certificate was lying face up and fully open. The pen pressure was wrong. A writer signing his own name does it from muscle memory. There is flow and habit in every stroke. This signature had small hesitations, micro-corrections, the telltale marks of someone copying a signature they had studied rather than one they had made 10,000 times without thinking. I straightened up. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. I had expected them to shake. Instead, what I felt was a cold, clarifying stillness, the kind that arrives not from calm, but from certainty. The kind that says you already knew. You just needed to see it written clearly enough. I carried the package back to my van. I did not deliver it. I set it on the passenger seat, sat down behind the wheel, and called the delivery company's dispatch line to report a damaged package requiring inspection. Standard procedure. No one would ask questions for at least 48 hours. Then I sat in that van for a long time. Outside, a sprinkler system clicked on across the street, sweeping back and forth across a lawn that was already perfectly green. A kid on a bicycle came around the corner, stood on the pedals to get up the slight incline, then disappeared around the next curve. A normal Tuesday afternoon on a street full of people who had no idea that anything unusual was happening inside a brown delivery van parked at 4412. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to Ethan's name. My thumb hovered over the call button for a full 30 seconds. Then I put the phone down. Ethan was 35 years old. He had been in that house for 4 years, in that neighborhood. He could not genuinely afford wearing suits that cost more than my monthly income, driving a car with payments that I suspected were never comfortable. I had helped him through the failed business at 22. I had quietly cleared the debt that showed up at 28. Each time I had told myself he just needed more time, more support, one more chance to find his footing. I looked at the package on the seat beside me. I thought about the Hemingway with its wrong-colored pages. I thought about Meridian Collectibles, LLC, which I had never heard of in 32 years of working in this field. I thought about collectors somewhere. Real collectors, people who had spent years building something they cared about, handing over real money for these. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. The anger came then hot and sudden, and I let it move through me without trying to stop it. Because underneath the anger was something that hurt far worse, the specific grief of a father who has finally run out of explanations. I started the engine. I did not drive to Ethan's front door. Not yet. The part of me that had spent 32 years learning to handle valuable things carefully understood one truth above all others: you do not act on what you feel in the moment you discover something broken. You stop. You assess. You figure out how bad the damage actually is before you decide what to do about it. I pulled out of Briarwood Court and headed toward home. The package sat on the seat beside me like a question I had not yet decided how to answer. But one thing was already settled in my chest, quiet and absolute the way the most important decisions always are. This was not nothing, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. I did not call ahead. Some conversations deserve the advantage of surprise not because you want to ambush someone, but because you want to see their face before they have had time to build a wall across it. I parked on the street outside Ethan's house at 7:43 that evening. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see the blue flicker of a television and the warm glow of a kitchen light beyond it. A normal Tuesday night on Briarwood Court. A family at home. A life that looked from the outside exactly like it was supposed to. I rang the doorbell and waited, my hands loose at my sides, my breathing steady. The package was back at my apartment, locked in my delivery bag. I had not brought it. I did not need it. What I had was 32 years of knowing what I was looking at, and that was enough. Ethan opened the door in a collared shirt and slacks, still dressed from work. For a fraction of a second, something moved across his face. Surprise, maybe? Or the thing that lives just underneath surprise when you are not entirely glad to see someone. Then he smiled, and it was the smile I had watched him perfect since he was a teenager. Smooth, practiced, just warm enough to pass. "Dad." He stepped back from the door. "This is unexpected. Come on in." "I won't be long," I said. "I just need a few minutes." I stepped inside. The living room was expensively furnished, leather sectional, a glass coffee table with a decorative book stacked on top of it that I was certain no one had ever read, framed abstract prints on the walls that cost more than my monthly rent. Megan appeared from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was in her early 30s, dark-haired, with the kind of polished composure that always reminded me of a storefront. After closing hours, everything arranged, precisely nothing left where it might suggest actual living. "Walter." Her voice was perfectly even, not warm, not cold, calibrated. What a surprise. "Megan." I nodded at her. "I'm sorry to drop by without calling. I just need to speak with Ethan for a moment." She looked at Ethan. Something passed between them, quick, practiced, the kind of wordless exchange that married couples develop over years of managing situations together. Then she said, "Of course. I'll check on Noah," and disappeared down the hallway. Ethan turned to me and the smile had shifted slightly, still present but recalibrated. "What's going on, Dad? You look tired." "I'm fine." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I had photographed the gap in the package before I sealed it back up, the pages of the Hemingway visible through the tissue paper, the certificate alongside the Steinbeck. I turned the screen toward Ethan and watched his face. His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the phone for exactly 2 seconds, then came back up to my face. 2 seconds was all it took. A man with nothing to hide looks at an unexpected photograph for longer than that. "What is that?" he said. His voice was steady, but his left hand. I noticed this because I had spent 30 years noticing details had closed into a loose fist at his side. "You know what it is," I said. I kept my voice low and level, the way I used to speak to Ethan when he was a boy and had done something that genuinely worried me rather than merely frustrated me. "Ethan, I need you to hear me. Stop this before it destroys your life, son. I know exactly what these are. I know what you are doing, and I know it has been going on long enough to have a name on a business account." Ethan's composure cracked, then not into guilt, but into something sharper. His chin came up and his shoulders squared, and I watched my boy transform in front of me into a man I did not entirely recognize. You went through my package? His voice rose by half a note. You had no right to. The package was damaged in transit, I said. Standard procedure required inspection. I am the one who picked it up. That's... He stopped, pressed his lips together. His nostrils flared with a sharp breath. That's a hell of a coincidence, Dad. Ethan. I took one step closer to him. I am not here to fight with you. I am here because you are my son, and because whatever this is, whatever you have gotten yourself into, it is not too late to stop. But it will be if you keep going. He looked at me then, with an expression that hit me somewhere below the sternum. Not hatred, not shame, but a kind of cold impatience, as though I were a meeting he had scheduled out of obligation and was now running long. You're a delivery man, Dad. His voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than shouting. You drive a van around Columbus dropping off boxes. You don't understand how the world works anymore. You haven't understood it in a long time. My throat tightened so hard it ached. My eyes burned and I refused to let them do anything about it, because I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing that land, even though it landed like a boot to the ribs. I understand what fraud is, I said. I understand what happens to people who get caught doing it. And I understand that whatever you think you have built here, I gestured at the leather furniture, the glass table, the framed prints. None of it is worth a federal charge. Ethan walked to the front door and opened it. His hand on the knob was rock steady. It's late, Dad. Drive safe. I walked toward the door. As I passed the built-in bookshelf beside the entryway, something stopped me cold. Third shelf from the top. Between a decorative atlas and a copy of some business bestseller whose title I could not read from the angle, a slim green volume with gold lettering on the spine. My heart lurched sideways in my chest so violently that I nearly put my hand against the wall to steady myself. I knew that book. I knew it the way I knew my own handwriting. I had held it the day I carried it home from the shop wrapped in brown paper the year Ethan turned 10. I had watched his face when he opened it, the wonder in his eyes, the way he had held it with both hands, without being told to, as if he already understood it was something that deserved careful handling. I made myself keep walking. I made myself go through the door and down the porch steps and along the front walk to my van, without stopping, without turning back, without letting Ethan see what I had just seen register on my face. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment. The porch light clicked off behind me. The neighborhood settled into its quiet Tuesday night rhythms. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself there were other copies. I told myself a lot of things on the drive home in the particular desperate way a person tells themselves things when they already know exactly what the truth is. A week passed. I kept delivering packages and saying nothing to Ethan, to Megan, to anyone. Silence had always been my way of giving people enough rope to make the right choice. What I had not fully accounted for was that some people given rope do not climb toward something better. They just keep digging. It was a Thursday afternoon, my second to last stop of the day, when the thing I had been quietly dreading walked up and introduced itself. The recipient was a man named Gerald Hoffman, mid-60s, retired-looking, the kind of man who wore a cardigan on a warm August afternoon because he had earned the right to dress however he pleased. He lived in a neat colonial on Devonshire Road, and when I handed him his package, he held it the way people hold things they have been waiting a long time to receive. "Another one from the Hayes collection," he said almost to himself, turning the package over in his hands. My delivery scanner nearly slipped from my fingers. I tightened my grip. "I'm sorry." I kept my voice completely neutral, a skill that 32 years of negotiating with sellers over fragile items had sharpened to a fine point. Gerald Hoffman looked up at me with the bright, eager expression of a man who has found a fellow enthusiast. "The Hayes family collection. The young man, Ethan, he mentioned his father built it over 30 years. Said the signatures were all personally verified. He chuckled warmly. I told my wife you cannot put a price on that kind of provenance. Expertise passed down through a family, you just don't find that anymore. The word provenance hit me like a flat palm against the chest. In the rare book world, provenance means the documented history of an item's ownership, the chain of custody that establishes authenticity. It is the single most important word in the business. And Ethan had weaponized it. He had taken my 30 years and turned them into a sales pitch for forgeries. How long have you been collecting? I asked, because I needed another few seconds before I trusted my face entirely. 30 years myself, Gerald said proudly. Started when my kids were young. Always wanted a signed Hemingway. Finally getting there. He patted the package. Thanks to the Hayes family. I handed him his receipt with a steady hand that I was genuinely proud of under the circumstances. Enjoy it, I said. And I walked back to my van before anything else could come out of my mouth. I sat behind the wheel and gripped the steering column with both hands until my knuckles ached. The fury that moved through me then was different from what I had felt in the van outside Ethan's house the week before. That had been shock wearing anger's coat. This was something cleaner and colder, the specific rage of a man who has watched someone take the most honest thing he ever built and use it to cheat a decent person out of their money. Gerald Hoffman had spent 30 years collecting. He had saved for that Hemingway. He had trusted a name, my name, and he was going home right now to unwrap a lie. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and searched every variation of Meridian collectibles and Hayes rare books I could construct. What came back made my stomach drop so sharply, I had to push back from the table and breathe for a moment. A website. Clean, professional, expensively designed. Photographs of books I recognized, or rather photographs of books I recognized as convincing imitations of books I recognized. And throughout the copy, threaded like a golden wire meant to catch the light references to the Hayes family's 30-year legacy in rare book curation, and signatures authenticated through generations of expertise. My name, my career, my 32 years, packaged, polished, and sold. I picked up my phone and called Richard Miller. Richard had been my closest friend for nearly 25 years. We had met through a mutual contact when I was authenticating a collection for an estate sale, and he was handling the legal side of the same estate. He was 62 now, still sharp as a man half his age, with the particular brand of patience that the best attorneys develop, the kind that does not mistake stillness for inaction. He picked up on the second ring. Walt, it's been a while. Tell me this is a social call. It isn't, I said, and I told him everything. The package, the books. Gerald Hoffman on Devonshire Road. The website with my name threaded through it like stolen thread. Richard did not interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause, not hesitation, but the pause of a man organizing information into its proper categories before he speaks. Okay, he said finally. First question, do you still have access to the package? I reported it as damaged. I have 48 hours before dispatch follows up. Good. Don't touch it further. Don't confront Ethan again. His voice was measured and deliberate. Walter, I need you to understand something. What you're describing, using a false name and false credentials to sell counterfeit goods, that is wire fraud under federal law. If they used email or electronic payment systems, which they almost certainly did, that triggers federal jurisdiction. This is not a small thing. My chest felt like something heavy had been set down on it. How bad? Potentially very bad. But Richard's voice shifted slightly, taking on the focused quality I had heard him use in serious situations We cannot do anything useful without documentation. I need you to write down everything you remember. Dates, addresses, names, anything you observed. And I need you to keep your eyes open over the next few weeks without tipping them off that you know. You're asking me to watch my son commit fraud and say nothing. I'm asking you to give me what I need to help you do this right, Richard said. Because if you walk in there half-prepared, Walter, he will have time to destroy everything, and then it becomes your word against his. Do you understand? I understood. Every bone in my body resisted it. Every instinct that had ever made me a father wanted to drive back to Briarwood Court and pound on that door until Ethan looked me in the eye and admitted what he had done. But Richard was right, and I had known Richard long enough to know that when he was right, arguing cost you more than it saved. I'll start writing tonight, I said. Good man. A brief pause. Walt, how are you holding up? I looked around my kitchen. The laptop with its damning search results. The notepad I had already pulled toward me, pen uncapped, ready to begin the most painful document I had ever had to write. I've been better, I said honestly. But I've also been worse. Richard made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to warmth a situation like this allowed. I'll clear my schedule for Friday. Come by the office. Bring everything you have. After I hung up, I sat for a long time with the pen in my hand and the notepad in front of me. Then I wrote the date at the top of the first page and began. September came in quietly, the way it always does in Columbus. The heat pulling back by degrees, the light changing from white to gold, the air carrying that particular crispness that makes you feel for exactly 1 week like everything might be all right. I had spent that week adding to my notes every evening, building the kind of careful, dated record that Richard had asked for. Names, addresses, package numbers, the website screenshots I had saved before Meridian Collectibles could scrub them. Every morning I woke up and went to work, and every evening I came home and wrote, and somewhere in between I tried not to think too hard about the fact that the person I was building a case against was my son. The morning of September 8th felt different from the moment I stepped outside. I could not have told you why. Some mornings carry a weight that you only recognize in retrospect. I was on my third delivery of the day, running a route through the older industrial stretch on the east side of Columbus. Warehouses converted to loft apartments, auto shops, a stretch of road where the lane markings had faded to suggestions. My van was moving at 30 miles an hour when the dark pickup truck came out of the side street on my left. It did not slow down. The impact hit the driver's side with a force that turned the world sideways. I heard the crunch of metal before I felt anything. And then the van was sliding across the road, and the curb came up fast, and my right arm went out instinctively to brace against the door, and then the pain arrived, white total, the kind that shuts everything else down immediately. I came to rest against the curb with the engine still running. My ears were ringing. Through the cracked windshield I could see the pickup truck, dark blue or black, I could not be certain, already moving. It did not stop. It turned at the far end of the block and was gone before I had fully processed what had happened. I sat there for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 30 seconds. Then I turned off the engine with my left hand, picked up my phone with my left hand, and called 911. 911, what is your emergency? My name is Walter Hayes. My voice came out steadier than I expected, which surprised me. I've been in a vehicle collision on Eastmore Drive near the old Kelton warehouse. The other vehicle left the scene. I have an injury to my right arm. I need an ambulance. Sir, are you able to stay on the line? Yes, I said. I'm not going anywhere. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my phone the entire time, partly to stay focused, and partly because the pain in my arm had reached a frequency that made concentrating on anything else nearly impossible. It radiated from somewhere below my elbow in long, nauseating waves, And I had enough sense left to know that bracing against a car door at 30 miles an hour with a 60-year-old arm is not something you walk away from without consequences. The paramedic who opened my door was a young man with a calm, efficient manner that I found genuinely comforting under the circumstances. "Sir, can you tell me where the pain is?" "Right forearm," I said. "Possibly the wrist. I used it to brace on impact." "On a scale of 1 to 10. 7, I said, moving toward 8. He exchanged a look with his partner, a quick professional assessment, and said, "We're going to get you stabilized. Can you tell me if you lost consciousness at any point?" "No, I was awake the whole time." "Good. That's good, sir. Just keep talking to me." At Columbus General's emergency department, the X-ray confirmed what the pain had already told me: a clean fracture of the radius bone in my right forearm, approximately 4 inches above the wrist. The attending physician, a younger man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, showed me the image with the matter-of-fact directness that emergency doctors develop out of necessity. "Clean break," he said. "No displacement, which is the good news. You'll be in a splint today, and we'll fit you for a cast in about a week once the swelling settles. 6 weeks minimum before you can put weight on it. No lifting, no driving a commercial vehicle." "How long before I can work?" I asked, because the math was already running in the back of my mind. 6 weeks without delivering meant 6 weeks without income, which meant the small savings I had were about to start shrinking in a direction I did not enjoy contemplating. "Define work," the doctor said, with the practiced patience of a man who has heard that question 1,000 times. "Delivery driver." He shook his head with genuine sympathy. "Not for 6 weeks. Possibly 8, depending on how you heal. I'd recommend you contact your employer today about medical leave. Do you have someone who can drive you home?" I thought about who I would call. Richard was in meetings on Thursday afternoons. Frank next door was visiting his daughter in Cincinnati this week. And Ethan, I picked up my phone and called Ethan. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "Dad!" He sounded distracted the way he always sounded when work had his attention, and everything else was background noise. "What's up?" "I've been in an accident," I said. "I'm at Columbus General. My right arm is broken. I need someone to drive me home." A pause. Not the pause of concern. I knew what that sounded like. This was the pause of a man recalculating his afternoon. "Today's not great, Dad. I've got a presentation at 4 and Megan has Noah at his checkup until..." "Ethan." My voice came out with an edge I had not entirely intended. "I'm sitting in an emergency room with a broken arm. I am asking you to come." Another pause. Longer this time. "Can you call a cab? I'll come by this weekend, I promise. We'll get you set up with whatever you need." The pain in my arm chose that exact moment to send a particularly vicious wave up toward my shoulder. I breathed through it carefully the way the nurse had shown me. "I'll figure it out," I said. "Don't worry about it." I ended the call before he could respond. I sat on the edge of the examination table with the splint on my arm and the paper gown crinkling every time I moved, and I stared at the linoleum floor and felt something move through me that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the narrow, aching space between them. I called a cab with my left hand. While I waited, I thought about the dark pickup truck that had not slowed down. I thought about the timing of it 3 weeks into quietly building a paper trail on Meridian Collectibles, and a vehicle hits me and drives away. I thought about Richard's voice on the phone the week before had anyone noticed me asking questions. I told myself it was a coincidence. Columbus had hit-and-run accidents every week. There was no reason to connect this to anything. But the thought had arrived, and thoughts like that one do not leave just because you ask them to. They discharged me at 3:45 in the afternoon with a splint, a prescription for ibuprofen, a printed sheet of instructions I could not read properly, because my reading glasses were still in the van, and the particular brand of loneliness that comes from leaving a hospital without anyone waiting in the parking lot. The cab driver asked if I needed help with the door. I told him I was fine. I had been telling people that for so long that it came out automatically now, like breathing. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I got home. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the coffee maker and trying to work out the logistics of operating it with one functional hand, before I decided that the problem could wait until morning. I took 2 ibuprofen with a glass of water, sat down in the chair by the window, and watched the Columbus afternoon go about its business without me. By 6 o'clock, I had made a decision. Not out of weakness, I want to be clear about that. I went to Ethan's house that evening because I genuinely believed, even after everything, that a man's son would not leave him sitting alone with a broken arm and nowhere to turn. I had apparently not finished learning the lessons that year intended to teach me. I took a cab to Briarwood Court. When Noah opened the door, Ethan had apparently taught him to check the peephole first, which was one genuinely good parenting decision. I could credit him with the little boy's face split into a grin so wide and sudden that it physically hurt me to look at it, in the way that pure, uncomplicated joy sometimes hurts when you are not in a position to receive it properly. "Grandpa," Noah launched himself forward and wrapped both arms around my waist. His face pressed against my stomach, and I put my good left arm around him and held on. He was 6 years old, and he smelled like crayon wax and something artificially grape-flavored, and holding him with one arm while the other throbbed inside its splint was both the best and worst I had felt all day. "Easy, buddy," I said, my voice catching slightly on the word. "Grandpa's arm is a little banged up today." Noah pulled back and looked at the splint with enormous, worried eyes. "What happened? Did you fall?" "Something like that," I said. "I'm okay." "Does it hurt?" He reached out one small hand and hovered it over the splint without touching, with a delicacy that 6-year-olds are not supposed to have, but occasionally produce when it matters most. My throat tightened so sharply I had to swallow twice. "A little," I said, "but seeing you helps." Megan appeared at the end of the hallway. She was in exercise clothes, her hair pulled back, phone in hand, and the expression on her face when she saw me standing in her doorway was not the expression of a woman seeing her injured father-in-law for the first time since his accident. It was the expression of a woman seeing a problem she had not scheduled. "Walter." She did not come any closer. "Ethan said you were in an accident." "I was." I kept my voice level. "I was hoping I could stay here for a few days, just until I can manage on my own. The arm makes some things difficult." Something moved behind Megan's eyes, a rapid, precise calculation that she did not bother to disguise. Then she said, "That's really not a good time for us right now." I felt Noah's hand find mine, the good one, and squeeze. The small warmth of those fingers around mine was the only thing that kept my voice from doing something I would have regretted. "I understand," I said. "Is Ethan home?" "He's on a work call." She glanced at her phone. "He could be a while." "I'll wait," I said. She did not invite me inside. I stood in the doorway with Noah's hand in mine while Megan went to get Ethan, and I looked at the entryway of my son's house. The coat rack with his expensive jackets, the console table with a decorative bowl full of keys, the framed family photo on the wall in which everyone was smiling, the particular smile of people who have been told to smile. And I thought about all the times I had stood in doorways waiting for Ethan, waiting for him to come home from school, waiting for him to call back, waiting for him to become the person I kept believing he was capable of being. Ethan came down the hallway with his phone still in his hand, and his work face still on the one with the slightly elevated chin and the efficiency in his eyes that I recognized from every time he wanted to move a conversation along without engaging it. "Dad." He looked at the splint. "You should have called. I would have come to the hospital." "I did call," I said. "You had a presentation." A flicker crossed his face so brief I might have missed it if I had not been watching. Then, Look, it's not a great week. Noah's got school, Megan's schedule is—" "Ethan!" My voice came out quiet and very deliberate. "I am asking you as your father if I can stay here for a few days. I can't drive. I can barely make coffee. I'm not asking for much." Megan stepped up beside him. "Buy your own food, old man," she said, and her voice was so flat and so utterly without apology that for a moment I genuinely thought I had misheard her. "Stop living off us." The words landed like something physical. I felt Noah's hand tighten around mine. The boy did not understand what had been said, but he understood the tone the way children always understand tone before they understand words. Ethan looked at the floor for exactly 1 second. Then he raised his eyes to mine and said, "You're old enough to take care of yourself, Dad. Don't make us responsible for you." I stood there. My arm throbbed. The ibuprofen was wearing off. Somewhere behind Ethan, I could hear the television running in the living room. The same television, the same room, the same house, and I was standing on the outside of it, asking to be let in, and the answer was no. I looked down at Noah. His small face was turned up toward mine, confused and frightened, in the way children get when the adults around them do not make sense. I squeezed his hand once, carefully, and then I let go. "Okay," I said. I said it the way you say something when there is nothing else that fits. Then I turned and walked back down the porch steps to the street. I did not call a cab right away. I stood on the sidewalk outside 4412 Briarwood Court in the September evening with a broken arm and let the full weight of what had just happened settle across my shoulders. And something shifted inside me, then not broke, not collapsed, but shifted like a foundation resettling after a long period of pressure. The part of me that had spent 35 years finding reasons to protect Ethan from the consequences of his choices went very, very quiet. I took out my phone. I called Richard. He picked up on the first ring. "Walt, I was just thinking about you. How's the arm?" "Broken," I said. "Richard, I'm ready. Tell me exactly what I need to do." A brief pause. Then Richard's voice steady and certain. "Come to my office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Bring everything you have." "I'll be there," I said. I called a cab. While I waited, I stood under the streetlight on Briarwood Court and felt for the first time since all of this began completely clear about what came next. Richard's office was on the 14th floor of a building on North High Street that had been there since before either of us had gray hair. The elevator still made a mechanical groan between the 12th and 13th floors that I had heard every time I visited for 25 years. Some things in this city refused to change, and I had always found that quietly comforting. His secretary, a composed woman named Barbara, who had worked for Richard since the Clinton administration, waved me through without making me wait. That told me something. Richard had told her to send me straight in, which meant he had been thinking about this since last night. Richard was standing at his window when I entered, looking out over Columbus, with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, white-haired, with the kind of physical presence that made juries pay attention, without him having to raise his voice. He turned when he heard me, and the look on his face was not the social expression of a friend greeting a friend. It was the focused, careful expression of a man who had already started working. "Sit down, Walt." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "How's the arm?" "It's reminding me it exists every 20 minutes or so," I said, lowering myself into the chair carefully. "I brought everything." I set my folder on his desk, printed screenshots of the Meridian Collectibles website, my handwritten log of dates and addresses and package numbers, the photograph I had taken through the gap in the box, and a printed list of every transaction I had been able to reconstruct from memory and observation over the past 3 weeks. Richard sat down and opened the folder without preamble. He read the way he did everything completely without rushing, his eyes moving steadily down each page. I sat across from him and watched him work, and felt the particular relief of handing something too heavy to carry alone to someone strong enough to hold it with you. After 12 minutes, I watched the clock on his wall. He looked up. "Tell me about Megan," he said. The question surprised me. "What about her? Everything on this website." He tapped the printed screenshots. "The client communication style, the way the inventory is described, the pricing structure. This is not Ethan's work. Your son is many things, Walter, but he does not have the patience for this level of sustained organization. Someone is running the back end of this operation who understands how to build client trust over time." He leaned forward slightly. "Is Megan detail-oriented? Does she manage the household finances? Does she have a background in sales or marketing?" I thought about Megan at the door last night, the rapid, precise calculation behind her eyes before she spoke. The way she had appeared and disappeared like a stage manager controlling a scene. "She worked in luxury real estate marketing before Noah was born," I said slowly. "And yes, she manages everything in that house. Ethan couldn't tell you what their electric bill is." Richard nodded, his expression sharpening. "That's what I thought. Walter, your son may be the name on this business account. But the person who built this, who found the clients structured, the pricing, managed the communications, that is Megan. Which means when this unravels, and it will unravel, her exposure is significantly greater than his." The information landed in my chest like something cold and heavy. Megan. I had never liked her that much, was simply honest, but I had never imagined her as the architect of something like this. "What do we need?" I asked. "To make a case that holds." Richard opened his desk drawer and produced a legal pad. "3 things. Financial records showing money moving from buyers to their accounts. We can subpoena those once we have enough probable cause. Authentication reports from a qualified rare book expert, confirming the items are counterfeit. I know 2 people in Chicago who can do that. And," he paused, pen hovering, "a direct connection between the forged items and Ethan or Megan's possession or distribution. The package you photographed is a start. But we need more. How long? If you keep documenting and nothing changes on their end, 3 to 4 weeks. Maybe less." He set down his pen and looked at me directly, the way he did when he wanted to make sure something got through. "Walter, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Is there any chance Ethan could claim he didn't know the books were forged, that he was just selling what Megan gave him?" I thought about Ethan's face in his living room, the 2-second look at my photograph before his jaw tightened. "He knew," I said. "The moment I showed him that image, he knew exactly what he was looking at. A man who didn't know would have asked questions. He threatened me instead." Richard wrote something on his legal pad. "Good. That matters." He closed the folder and slid it back across the desk to me. "Keep this somewhere safe. Not your apartment, somewhere they can't access if things escalate." Do you have a safety deposit box? I can get one today. Do that. He stood and extended his hand, not the social handshake of friends, but the firm, deliberate handshake of a man making a commitment. I'm going to make some calls this afternoon. Stay available. And Walt. His grip tightened briefly before releasing. You did the right thing coming to me. I rode the elevator back down with the folder under my good arm, and Richard's words sitting somewhere behind my sternum. On the drive home in the cab, I thought about the green book on Ethan's shelf. I had been pushing that thought to the edges of my mind for 2 weeks now, telling myself there were other copies, telling myself I could not be certain. But Richard had asked me to be honest today, and honesty, once you let it through the door, tends to walk through more than one room. I was going to have to look at that directly very soon. I could feel it the way you feel weather coming, not yet, but close. Close enough that pretending otherwise was becoming its own kind of dishonesty. There are things a father knows about his child that cannot be explained to someone who has never been one. The exact weight of a 6-year-old asleep against your shoulder. The specific pitch of a cry that means genuinely hurt versus the kind designed to produce results. And the precise appearance of a book you placed into your son's hands on the afternoon of his 10th birthday, 25 years ago, wrapped in brown paper because you had not had time to find proper gift wrap and had told yourself the book was the point anyway. I had been telling myself for 3 weeks that I was wrong about what I had seen on Ethan's shelf. People collect. Books are reprinted. There are other copies in the world of a 1952 first edition of a short story collection that had meant something to me since I was 23 years old. I was an old man with a broken arm and a complicated month, and I was not thinking clearly, and I was almost certainly mistaken. I opened the box on the shelf in my bedroom closet on a Wednesday evening in late September and stopped telling myself that. The box was shoebox-sized cardboard labeled in Margaret's handwriting, her looping, unhurried script that I still could not look at directly, without my chest doing something complicated. Inside were photographs and documents I had kept from the store's early years. Near the bottom, I found what I had known on some level was going to be there. A photograph. Ethan, at 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table of our old house on Tremont Road, holding a slim green book with gold lettering on the spine with both hands, the way I had taught him to hold old books, flat, supported, nothing bent. His face was turned toward the camera, and he was grinning with the uncomplicated, total joy of a child who has just received something he did not know he wanted until the moment he had it. I sat on the edge of my bed and held that photograph with my good hand until my fingers went slightly numb. Then I picked up my phone and called the Whitmore Gallery on 5th Street, a private, rare book dealership I had worked with for 15 years before I sold my store. A man named Henderson answered the kind of calm, meticulous voice that rare book dealers develop as a professional necessity. Henderson, it's Walter Hayes. Walter, his voice warmed immediately. It's been too long. How can I help you? I'm looking for information on a recent listing, I said. A 1952 first edition Caldwell short story collection, green cloth binding, gold spine lettering. Possibly came through recently, with a provenance claim attached. A pause, the sound of a keyboard. Let me check our recent acquisitions log. Another pause longer. Actually, yes. We were approached about that exact item 2 weeks ago. Declined to purchase, as it happens. My stomach dropped so sharply I had to press my free hand flat against my knee to steady myself. Why did you decline? The provenance documentation was thin. Henderson said carefully, with the diplomatic precision of a man discussing a delicate professional matter. The seller claimed the book had been in a private family collection for 30 years and produced a certificate. But when we requested supporting documentation, Original purchase receipts, prior authentication records. They couldn't provide anything substantial. And frankly, the certificate itself raised questions. The format was inconsistent with what legitimate authentication houses produce. A brief pause. The seller's name, if I recall, Hayes. Ethan Hayes. A relation of yours. The room felt very still around me. Outside my window, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling. Yes, I said. My son. Henderson was quiet for a moment, the careful quiet of a professional who has just understood the shape of a situation he did not anticipate. Walter, I'm sorry. And don't be, I said, and I meant it more than I could explain. Henderson, I need to ask you something important. If that book were the genuine article, how would you establish its origin? Purchase records from the original sale, if they exist. Any prior authentication documentation. Previous ownership records. Photographs showing the item in the owner's possession at a specific date. He paused. Something like a dated photograph of the owner holding the book would actually be quite valuable from a provenance standpoint. I looked at the photograph in my hand. Ethan at 10 years old. The book held in both hands the way I had taught him. A date stamp in the lower right corner from the disposable camera we had used that year. October 14th, 2001. I have that, I said. After I hung up, I called Richard. He picked up on the second ring, and I told him what I had found, the photograph. Henderson's account, the declined sale. The thin provenance documentation. Richard listened without interrupting, and when I finished, his voice was quiet and precise. Walter, that photograph is evidence. Dated photographic proof that the book was in your possession and gifted to Ethan. Combined with Henderson's account of the attempted sale, it establishes that Ethan attempted to monetize an item with a documented personal history and falsified its provenance. A brief pause. This strengthens the case considerably. I know, I said. How are you holding up? I looked at the photograph one more time. My boy at 10, holding something precious with both hands, grinning like the world was entirely manageable. Then I set it face down on the nightstand. He didn't just take a book from me, Richard, I said. He took the only thing I ever gave him that I genuinely could not replace. And he tried to sell it to a stranger. Richard did not offer comfort, because he knew me well enough to know I was not asking for it. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we keep building. I lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city outside. The photograph sat face down on the nightstand. I did not turn it over again. But I did not put it away either. Some truths, once you let yourself see them, clearly deserve to stay where you can look at them, not because they feel good, but because looking away is how you end up back where you started. October arrived the way it always does in Ohio, all at once. Like someone had reached up and turned a dial. One morning the trees were still green, and the next they were burning orange and red along every street in the neighborhood, and the air had that particular sharp quality that makes everything feel slightly more urgent than it did a week ago. I had settled into a rhythm by then. Morning coffee with my good hand. Notes added to the growing file I kept at Richard's office. Careful, patient documentation of everything I could observe without tipping off anyone that I was observing it. Richard had called twice that week to tell me we were making progress. The authentication expert in Chicago had reviewed the photographs and confirmed in writing that the Hemingway and the Steinbeck were modern forgeries. That written confirmation was now part of the file. The case was building. All I had to do was stay steady. I was sitting at my kitchen table on the morning of October 1st, reviewing my notes with a cup of coffee going cold beside me when my phone rang. The number was Ethan's home line, and my chest tightened automatically before I answered that involuntary physical response I had developed to anything connected to Briarwood Court. But the voice that came through was not Ethan's. It was not Megan's either. It was small and slightly breathless, and unmistakably Noah's. "Grandpa." His voice cracked on the second syllable in the way children's voices crack when they have been crying and are trying very hard to sound like they have not been. Are you busy?" Every muscle in my body unclenched at once. "Never too busy for you, buddy," I said. "What's going on? Are you okay?" "I'm okay." A sniff. Then with the careful dignity of a 6-year-old trying very hard to be brave. "Grandpa, tomorrow is my first day of first grade. My real first day, with the ceremony and everything." Another sniff. "Mom said you might have a lot going on, but I really want you to come. I want you to see me go in." My throat closed so completely that for a moment I could not have spoken if my life depended on it. I pressed my free hand flat against the kitchen table and breathed carefully through my nose the way I had learned to do these past weeks when something hit harder than I was prepared for. "Noah," I said when I trusted my voice again. "What time does the ceremony start?" 8 o'clock. A pause. "There's going to be a flag thing, and then we walk in together. All the first graders." His voice brightened slightly with the excitement that 6-year-olds cannot fully suppress, even when they are trying to be sad. "Mrs. Patterson says we each get a name tag with our picture on it." "A name tag with your picture." I felt something loosen in my chest that had been knotted for weeks. "That sounds pretty official." "It's very official, Grandpa." With great seriousness. Then quietly, the bravery slipping just a little. "Do you promise you'll come for real?" A promise to a 6-year-old is not a small thing. Noah had learned that distinction early. He understood the difference between maybe and I promise in the way that children who pay close attention to adults always do. I knew what I was agreeing to. I knew Ethan would not want me there. I knew Megan would view my presence as a provocation. I knew the carefully maintained distance Richard and I had been keeping was going to be tested the moment I walked onto that school grounds. I promise," I said. "I will be there at 8 o'clock. Noah made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob and landed entirely in the region of the heart. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Grandpa. I'll see you tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, with my hand still resting on the phone. Then I called Richard. "I'm going to Noah's school ceremony tomorrow morning," I said when he picked up. A pause. "Walt," I promised him, Richard. He called me himself. He was crying. Another pause, longer this time, the kind where I could almost hear Richard weighing outcomes against each other, with the precision of a man who had spent 40 years doing exactly that. "Ethan will be there," he said finally. "I know, so keep your distance. Do not engage with Ethan or Megan beyond basic civility. If either of them says anything that could be construed as a threat or an admission, remember it word for word and call me the moment you leave the property." "I know how to behave in public, Richard. I know you do." A brief pause. "Walt, stay calm no matter what happens. Whatever he says to you, whatever she says to you. You keep that face completely neutral, and you remember that every interaction now is potentially part of a legal record." "Understood." And his voice shifted just slightly into something warmer. "Give that boy a hug from me." After I hung up, I went to my closet and found the good jacket, the navy one I wore when things mattered. I pressed it with my good hand, and the iron working around the splint, which took twice as long as it should have, and was moderately ridiculous. Margaret would have laughed at me. The thought arrived with its usual combination of warmth and ache. 20 minutes later, Megan called. Her voice was the temperature of the air outside. "Noah shouldn't have called you directly," she said without greeting. "This is a family event, Walter. We would prefer you didn't attend." I kept my voice pleasant and entirely unmovable. I made a promise to my grandson. "I'll stand at the back. You won't need to interact with me at all." Walter. Megan. I said her name the way I said it when I meant it as a period rather than an address. "I will be there at 8 o'clock. I will be respectful, and I will stay out of your way." That is all I have to say about it. She ended the call. I set the phone down, picked up my ironed jacket, and hung it carefully on the back of the bedroom door for the morning. Through the window, the October trees were burning orange and red against a sky the color of a clean sheet of paper. And somewhere on the other side of the city, a little boy with a name tag with his picture on it was probably already picking out what to wear. I set my alarm for 6:30. Whatever tomorrow brought, and some part of me that had been paying attention knew it would bring more than a school ceremony, I was going to be there. Before I tell you what happened at that school, what Ethan did in that hallway in front of everyone on the morning that changed everything, drop a number in the comments right now. Any number. Just so I know you're still here with me, because what comes next is something I never imagined I would have to say out loud about my own son. And a quick note. The story ahead contains some fictional elements. It may not reflect every detail exactly as it happened. If that's not for you, you're welcome to step away right now. But if you've come this far, I think you'll want to stay. Riverside Elementary was a 2-story red brick building on Clearview Avenue, with a flagpole out front and a painted mural of children reading books along the side wall that someone had clearly put real love into. I arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes early, and stood near the back of the gathering crowd of parents and grandparents, with my hands in my jacket pockets and my splinted arm held carefully at my side. The October morning was cold and bright, the kind of day that makes everything look slightly more vivid than usual. Parents held coffee cups and took photographs. Younger siblings sat in strollers. A teacher with a clipboard directed first graders into a loose formation near the front doors, straightening backpacks and reading name tags aloud in the cheerful, inexhaustible voice that elementary school teachers develop as a survival mechanism. I spotted Noah before he spotted me. He was near the middle of the line, wearing the blue jacket I had given him last Christmas, his name tag stuck slightly crooked on his chest. He was turning his head in every direction with the focused intensity of a child scanning a crowd for one specific face. He found mine. His entire body responded. Before his brain caught up, he broke from the line with a joyful disregard for the teacher's gentle protest and came running across the pavement toward me with his arms already open. "Grandpa, you came. You really came." I caught him with my good arm and held him against my chest, and felt him squeeze me with the uncomplicated total force that 6-year-olds put into hugs when they mean them completely. My eyes burned. I blinked hard and fast and pressed my face briefly into the top of his head. "Of course I came," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "I promised, didn't I?" "You did." He pulled back and looked up at me with his mother's eyes and his grandfather's stubbornness written all over his face. "Do you see my name tag? Mrs. Patterson did them herself." "I see it," I said. "Very official." He beamed that wide, unguarded sunrise smile that children have before the world teaches them to be careful with it, and then his teacher called his name, and he ran back to his line, turning once to wave at me over his shoulder. I stayed where I was, near the back of the crowd. I saw Ethan and Megan near the front, Ethan in his work clothes, phone in his jacket pocket, Megan with her camera out. They had not seen me yet. I intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. The ceremony was brief and genuinely lovely. The children walked through the front doors in a single file line, while the parents applauded and photographed, and a few people around me openly wiped their eyes, which I found unexpectedly comforting. Noah walked through those doors with his chin up and his crooked name tag, and his shoulders set with the particular determination of a child who has decided today is important. And I felt something in my chest expand painfully outward in a way that had nothing to do with injury. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, I was moving carefully toward the parking area when I heard Ethan's voice behind me. "Dad." One word. But the way he said it, clipped, controlled, vibrating with something underneath that control like a wire pulled too tight, told me everything about what was coming. I turned. Ethan was moving toward me with his jaw set and his eyes hard, and before I could say anything, he had closed the distance between us and gripped my left arm and steered me firmly into the narrow corridor between the building's side wall and a row of parked bicycles. The space was partially shielded from the main courtyard, not invisible but out of the direct sight line of most of the dispersing crowd. Not far from us, a woman I did not recognize was standing near the bicycle rack, her phone raised, recording her daughter skipping toward her across the pavement. The phone's camera faced in our general direction. Neither she nor her daughter was paying the slightest attention to us. "You had no right to come here." Ethan's voice was low and savagely controlled. His face was flushed dark and his nostrils were flared, and I could see the muscle in his jaw working. "I told Megan to tell you." "Megan told me," I said. My voice came out steady. "Noah asked me first. Noah is my grandson. You are embarrassing this family." He stepped closer. The smell of his cologne was sharp and expensive. "Every time you show up somewhere you don't belong, you make us look." "Ethan." I kept my voice at the same measured level. I stood at the back. I spoke to no one except Noah. "I'm leaving now. Whatever you need to say to me, say it at home, not here. I always embarrass you." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, not with emotion, but with a fury that had nowhere left to go. He shook his head, and his eyes went somewhere past me, then came back. "Why can't you just stay away? Why do you have to keep—" "I only wanted to be there for my grandson," I said. "That is all I have ever wanted." What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Ethan's right hand came up and drove forward with a force that was not accidental and was not a shove. It was a punch-closed fist, direct aimed with the specific, terrible accuracy of a man who knew exactly where the splint was on my forearm and hit it anyway. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It detonated up my arm and into my shoulder and exploded behind my eyes in a white flash that dropped me against the brick wall. My knees buckled. I caught myself with my good hand against the rough surface, breathing in hard, short pulls, the world tilting sideways around me. Through the roaring in my ears, I heard the woman near the bicycle rack call out to her daughter. Her phone, I realized distantly, was still raised, still pointing in our general direction. I straightened slowly. My arm was screaming. Ethan was standing in front of me, and on his face not guilt, not horror, not the look of a man who has just realized what he has done. It was the look of a man checking whether anyone had seen. "That," I said when I could make my voice work, "was a mistake." I pushed myself off the wall and walked away from him. Every step cost me something. But I walked in a straight line to the parking area, and I did not stop, and I did not look back. I drove myself to Columbus General. I am aware of how that sounds, a man with a freshly re-injured broken arm, operating a vehicle through morning traffic. But the alternative was calling an ambulance and sitting on the pavement outside Riverside Elementary, while parents with strollers navigated around me, and I had enough dignity left to find that unacceptable. I drove with my left hand slowly and carefully, and I made it to the emergency entrance without incident, which I chose to interpret as the universe offering me one small mercy on an otherwise ungenerous morning. The triage nurse took one look at my face and moved me to a bed faster than my previous visit had managed. I must have looked worse than I felt, which was saying something because what I felt was considerable. Dr. Patricia Walsh arrived 12 minutes later, a woman in her mid-40s with efficient, observant eyes and the kind of composure that emergency physicians develop, not by suppressing their reactions, but by learning exactly where to put them. She unwrapped my splint with careful hands, and her expression as she examined what was underneath shifted in a way that was professionally controlled, but not entirely concealed. "Mr. Hayes," her voice was measured and deliberate, "this fracture was healing well based on your previous imaging. What I'm seeing now suggests significant new trauma to the same site. Directed impact rather than a fall." She looked up at me directly. "Can you tell me what happened this morning?" I had been sitting on that examination table for 12 minutes, rehearsing this moment, and when it arrived, I found that all the rehearsing had been unnecessary. The words came out plainly and without drama, the way true things often do when you have finally stopped fighting them. "My son hit my arm," I said, deliberately. He knew it was broken. Dr. Walsh held my gaze for a moment without speaking, not with shock, but with the careful attention of someone making sure they had heard correctly, and that the person across from them was sure of what they were saying. "I need to ask you some questions," she said. "And I need you to understand that depending on your answers, I am required by Ohio law to make a report. As a patient over 60 who presents with injuries consistent with assault by a family member, you fall under our mandatory reporting protocol for elder abuse." She paused. "Do you understand what that means?" "It means you call the police," I said. "It means I call the police," she confirmed. "Are you comfortable with that?" My arm throbbed in long, nauseating waves up to my shoulder. I thought about Ethan's face at not the moment of impact, but the moment after when his eyes had moved to check whether anyone was watching. The face of a man calculating exposure rather than registering what he had done. "Yes," I said. "I'm comfortable with that." Dr. Walsh asked me to walk her through exactly what had occurred. I did with the same careful precision I had been applying to my documentation notes for the past month. Dates, times, specific language, physical sequence of events. She wrote everything down in her own notes, and when I finished, she said, "I'm going to order new imaging for the arm and get you something for the pain. A detective will be here within the hour to take your statement. Is there anyone you'd like me to call while you wait?" "Richard Miller," I said. "He's my attorney." I gave her the number from memory. Richard arrived before the detective did. He came through the curtain of my examination bay, with his coat still on his reading glasses, pushed up on his head, and an expression on his face that combined genuine concern with the focused readiness of a man who had been waiting for the next development and was prepared to meet it. "How bad?" he said, pulling a chair to the side of the bed. "New fracture to the existing break. Walsh says the imaging will confirm." I looked at him steadily. "I told them Ethan did it. On purpose." Richard exhaled slowly through his nose, not surprise, but the deliberate release of a man processing a significant shift. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Walt. Here's what happens now. You give your statement to the detective exactly as you gave it to me on the phone. No elaboration, no interpretation, just the sequence of facts as you experienced them. I'll be present for the entire interview. You do not answer any question I indicate you shouldn't. Understood. Understood. And..." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. I'm going to contact my office and have them pull together everything we have on Meridian Collectibles. Because what happened this morning changes the timeline. We are no longer building quietly toward a future filing. This morning handed us an active police report that connects directly to the same parties. That is significant, Walter. The detective arrived 40 minutes later. A compact, methodical woman named Detective Reyes, who introduced herself without excess and sat down with a notepad and the businesslike manner of someone who had conducted this kind of interview many times and understood that efficiency was its own form of respect. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I'd like you to take me through what happened this morning from the beginning. Take your time." And so I did. I told her about Noah's phone call the night before. I told her about arriving at the school and standing at the back. I told her about Noah running across the pavement with his arms open and his name tag crooked on his chest. I told her about Ethan steering me into the corridor beside the building, and I gave her his exact words, as precisely as I could recall them. I told her about the punch, the deliberate targeted force of it aimed at the splint, and the white detonation of pain that followed. My voice stayed level throughout. My hands folded in my lap were steady. But somewhere in the middle of it, my eyes began to burn in a way I could not entirely suppress, and I paused once, just once, to breathe through it. And Detective Reyes waited without rushing me, which I appreciated more than I could have said. "Mr. Hayes," she said when I finished, "is there anything else you want to add to the record at this time?" I looked at Richard. He gave me a small, precise nod. "Yes," I said. "I want the record to reflect that this assault did not occur in isolation. My son and his wife have been operating a fraudulent rare book business using my name and professional reputation without my knowledge or consent for at least 14 months. My attorney has documentation. I would like that information to be part of whatever investigation follows from this morning." Detective Reyes wrote for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked up. "We'll want to see that documentation, Mr. Hayes." "You'll have it today," Richard said. After she left, Richard stayed. He sat in the chair beside my bed, while the imaging results came back confirmed refracture, 4 weeks added to recovery. And while Dr. Walsh discussed the new treatment plan, and while the afternoon light through the narrow window moved from bright to gold, to the particular amber of a Columbus October evening. "You doing all right?" Richard asked when the doctor had gone. I looked at my arm and its new cast. I thought about Noah's face at the school doors, the sunrise smile before the world had given him any reason to be careful with it. I thought about the woman near the bicycle rack with her phone raised, recording her daughter utterly unaware of what her camera had captured in the background. "Ask me again in a few days," I said. "Right now, I'm just trying to keep track of what comes next." Richard put his hand briefly on my shoulder, not a dramatic gesture, just the hand of a man who had been a friend for 25 years, and understood when words were not the right tool. "What comes next," he said, "is that the truth finally has somewhere official to go." 3 days after the hospital, I was sitting in my apartment with a new cast on my arm, a cup of coffee I had learned to make one-handed, and the particular suspended quality of a man waiting for a storm he can hear approaching but cannot yet see. Richard had told me to rest. Detective Reyes had told me to stay available. My body, which had opinions about everything at this point, was firmly in agreement with both of them. Richard called on Thursday morning. I picked up before the second ring. "Talk to me," I said. "I've been up since 5. His voice had the focused, slightly hoarse quality of a man who had been working for hours. "Walt, I need you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is going to be a lot." "I'm listening." The financial records came back from the subpoena we filed Wednesday. The account attached to Meridian Collectibles LLC has processed $412,000 in transactions over 19 months. He paused to let that settle. 412,000, Walter. This is not a small side operation. This is a sustained, organized fraud. My hand tightened around the phone. $412,000. The number sat in the middle of my mind, like something too large to fully see from where I was standing. Where did it go? I asked. That's where it gets worse. Papers shuffled on Richard's end. Approximately 60,000 went to what appear to be legitimate household expenses, mortgage payments, utilities, Noah's school tuition. But the remaining 350,000, another pause. Walter Ethan has a gambling account. Online sports betting registered in Nevada linked to a debit card in his name. Over the past 2 years, he has deposited more than $300,000 into that account. The bottom of my stomach dropped away entirely. I set down my coffee cup because my hand had started to shake. Not with anger, but with the particular trembling that arrives when something you suspected turns out to be so much worse than you let yourself imagine. He was gambling, I said. My voice sounded strange to me. Flat. Like someone had pressed all the air out of it. Heavily, Richard said, and his voice was gentle in the way that delivery of genuinely terrible news requires gentleness. Our best read of the timeline is that the gambling debts came first. He ran up losses he couldn't cover through his salary, and at some point, probably with Megan's involvement given the sophistication of the business structure, they built Meridian Collectibles as a funding mechanism. This wasn't ambition, Walt. This was desperation wearing the costume of ambition. I stood up from my chair. My legs needed to be moving. I walked slowly to the window and looked out at the Columbus street below, a normal Thursday morning, cars and pedestrians, and a dog walker with 3 dogs all going different directions. The world conducting its ordinary business while mine turned over completely. The accident, I said. Tell me about the accident. Detective Reyes's team ran the vehicle description you gave them. Dark blue pickup, no visible plates, east side of Columbus. They cross-referenced it with traffic camera footage from that corridor and identified a match, a 2019 Ford F-150 registered to a man named Douglas Greer. Richard's voice tightened slightly. Greer purchased a signed Hemingway from Meridian Collectibles 8 months ago for $14,000. He had it authenticated by an independent expert 6 weeks before your accident. The expert told him it was a fake. The trembling in my hand moved up my arm and settled somewhere in my chest. He came looking for the Hayes family expert, I said. He came looking for you, Richard confirmed. He had no way of knowing you weren't involved. As far as he knew, you were the operation. Reyes has a warrant out for Greer. Now he's facing felony hit-and-run and assault charges in addition to whatever civil liability follows. But Walt, his voice shifted. Do you understand what this means for the case against Ethan and Megan? The accident was a direct consequence of their fraud. A customer they defrauded using your name came after you physically. That is a chain of causation that a jury is going to find very difficult to ignore. I pressed my forehead briefly against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the dog walker had untangled all 3 leashes and was moving down the sidewalk with them arranged in a neat line. Richard, I said, how does Megan fit into the financial picture? You said the business structure was sophisticated. She built it. No hesitation. Every client communication we've recovered came from an email address tied to an account registered in her maiden name. The pricing structure, the authentication certificates, the provenance documentation, all of it bears her organizational signature. Ethan's fingerprints are on the physical handling the packages, the drop-offs. But the architecture of this operation is Megan's work from the ground up. A brief pause. She's more exposed than he is legally, and she almost certainly knows it. I thought about Megan at the hospital telling me to buy my own food. The rapid, precise calculation behind her eyes before she spoke. the stage manager controlling a scene. "She's going to turn on him," I said. "Not a question. When the pressure gets high enough," Richard said carefully. "People in her position usually do. It's not personal. It's math." Another pause. "Walt, I want to prepare you for something. This is going to become public. The scale of the fraud, the number of victims, the profile of some of the collectors involved. This won't stay local. When it breaks, your name is going to be in it, because Ethan used your name. I am going to draft a statement today that makes your status as a victim absolutely unambiguous. But I need you to be prepared for it to be uncomfortable for a while. My name in the news. My 32 years of honest work attached to someone else's fraud in the public record, even if only temporarily, even with the truth clearly established." "I've been uncomfortable before," I said. "I know you have." Something in Richard's voice shifted. Not the lawyer now, just the friend. "You doing okay, Walt? Honestly, I looked around my apartment. The coffee going cold on the table, the cast on my arm. The file of documentation I had spent a month building sitting in Richard's safe, about to become something official and consequential and impossible to undo." "I'm doing what I always do," I said. "I'm keeping track of what needs to happen next, and I'm doing it one thing at a time." Richard made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh that the situation allowed. "That'll do," he said. "I'll call you this afternoon. Stay close to your phone." After I hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. $350,000 in gambling losses. A customer who had driven a pickup truck into my van because he believed I had stolen $14,000 from him. A daughter-in-law who had built a fraud operation with the patience and precision of someone who had never intended for it to end any other way than in someone else taking the blame. And my son somewhere on the other side of the city, still believing I was almost certain that none of this was going to reach him. That it would stop somewhere short of the place where he actually had to face it. He had always believed that. I had spent 35 years making sure he was right. Not anymore. Richard had told me not to be there when they brought Ethan in for questioning. He said it plainly, the way he said things he considered non-negotiable. Watching your son lie to a detective in a police interview room is something a person carries differently than being told about it afterward, and he needed me functional and clear-headed, not hollowed out by something I could not unsee. I listened to him. I stayed at my apartment with a book I did not read and a cup of coffee that went cold on the table beside me, and I watched the October light move across the floor and waited for my phone to ring. Richard called at 2:17 in the afternoon. I picked up before the ring finished. "Tell me," I said. "He came in with his own attorney." Richard's voice had the focused, slightly compressed quality of a man reporting from inside something significant. "Private practice downtown, good firm, which tells me Ethan has been preparing for this possibility longer than he let on. He came in dressed for work. Calm, confident." A brief pause. "He was very good, Walt. I want you to know that. He was composed in a way that suggested rehearsal." My chest tightened. "What did he say?" His opening position was exactly what I anticipated. He told Detective Reyes that you are the rare book expert in the family, that the business concept originated with you, that he was simply helping you manage sales and logistics because your delivery schedule made it difficult for you to handle client communications directly. Richard's voice stayed level, but I could hear the controlled anger underneath it, the kind that experienced attorneys learn to compress into something precise. He said, and I am quoting this exactly, "My father is the one who knows about rare books. I was just helping him. The words hit me somewhere below the solar plexus with a force that was almost physical. My free hand gripped the arm of my chair so hard the knuckles ached. "He threw it on me," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "He did." Richard let that sit for exactly 1 second before continuing. "Reyes asked him about the incident at the school. He denied striking you, said you lost your balance in the corridor, and he reached out to try to catch you. Said the injury was accidental and that he was distressed you had mischaracterized it to hospital staff." Another pause. "He was very earnest about that part. Very concerned son. I'll give him credit for the performance." I stood up from my chair because sitting felt suddenly impossible. I walked to the window with the phone pressed against my ear, my cast bumping lightly against the frame, and I breathed through the white-hot wave of something that was beyond anger, beyond anything I had a clean word for. It was the specific agony of hearing your own name used as a shield by the person you spent your life trying to protect. "Richard," I said carefully, "please tell me what happened next." Reyes let him finish. She did not react, which is something she does extremely well. And then, and here something shifted in Richard's voice, a quality I recognized after 25 years as the sound of a man who has been waiting to deliver a piece of information and has finally arrived at the right moment. She told him she had something she wanted him to look at, and she played the video. My breath stopped. "The parent at the school," I said. "Her name is Sandra Kowalski. She was recording her daughter coming out through the front gates. Her phone was a newer model, good camera, 4K resolution timestamp embedded in the metadata. The corridor where you and Ethan were standing was approximately 30 feet to the left of her daughter. Not the focus of her recording, but completely within frame." Richard exhaled slowly. "Walter, it is unambiguous. The footage shows Ethan steering you by the arm into that corridor. It shows the sequence of the conversation, your posture, his posture, the escalation. And it shows the punch. Closed fist, directed impact aimed at the cast. Then it shows you going down against the wall. The room felt very still around me. My legs had gone slightly unsteady and I pressed my shoulder against the window frame to compensate." "What did Ethan do?" I asked. "When he saw it, he stopped talking," Richard said. "Completely." His attorney leaned over and said something in his ear and Ethan just stopped. His face went a color I would describe as gray, not pale gray, like something had been switched off behind it. A brief pause. His attorney requested a recess immediately. Reyes granted 15 minutes. When they came back, Ethan had no further comment on the school incident. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the window, the same way I had 3 days ago, and breathed. "There's more," Richard said. "And this part, Walt. This part came from somewhere none of us expected." "Tell me." Mrs. Patterson." Noah's first-grade teacher at Riverside contacted Detective Reyes's office yesterday morning. Apparently Noah had said something during a quiet activity period at school last week. The children were drawing pictures of their families, and Mrs. Patterson was moving around the room, and Noah told her, without being asked, just talking the way 6-year-olds talk, when they're working on something, that his daddy had said something about Grandpa that he didn't understand. My throat tightened so suddenly it hurt. "What did he say?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Noah told Mrs. Patterson, and I'm reading from her written statement now. "Daddy said Grandpa will never dare to tell on us. Noah said he heard it a few weeks ago when he was supposed to be asleep. He said it made him feel bad, but he didn't know why." Richard's voice was very quiet now. "Mrs. Patterson reported it to the school counselor who reported it to Reyes. It came in yesterday." Reyes told me this morning. I turned away from the window. My eyes were burning so fiercely that everything in my apartment blurred at the edges. I sat down heavily on the couch and pressed the back of my good hand against my mouth and breathed through it the raw, tearing ache of knowing that a 6-year-old boy had been carrying that sentence around inside him. Not understanding it, feeling bad without knowing why, drawing a picture of his family, while his daddy's words sat in his chest like something too heavy for small hands to put down. "He's going to be okay," I said. It came out rough and unsteady. "Noah. He doesn't understand what he said, Richard. He doesn't know what it means. No." Richard agreed, and his voice was gentle. "He doesn't, which is exactly why it landed the way it did. A 6-year-old has no reason to construct a story." Reyes said it's one of the cleaner pieces of corroborating testimony she's seen because there is absolutely no possibility of coaching or fabrication. A pause. "Walt. Ethan said that sentence believing he was safe, believing you would never follow through. He underestimated you in the most fundamental way a person can underestimate someone. He confused your patience with weakness." I sat on that couch for a long moment. The afternoon light was going amber outside. Somewhere in the building above me, someone was cooking something with onions, and the smell drifted faintly through the ventilation. "What happens now?" I asked. "Ethan's attorney will try to negotiate. The video and Noah's statement together make a denial of the assault untenable, and the fraud charges are building fast enough that his attorney knows fighting on two fronts simultaneously is not a winning position." Richard's voice steadied into the clear, deliberate register of a man laying out a path. "I expect we will hear from them within the week. But Walter, I need you to be prepared for it to get harder before it gets easier. When people realize the walls are closing, they sometimes do things that surprise you." I thought about the Ethan I had watched walk into his first day of kindergarten 30 years ago, holding Margaret's hand, looking back at me over his shoulder to make sure I was still there. "He's already surprised me," I said. "I don't think there's much left." November arrived cold and without ceremony. I had spent the last days of October in a rhythm that was almost meditative in its bleakness. Physical therapy for the arm every other morning, careful one-handed meals, evenings with Richard's updates, and my own thoughts for company. The cast had become so familiar that I had stopped noticing its weight, which seemed to me like a reasonable metaphor for several other things in my life. Richard called on the first Monday of November at 7:53 in the morning. I was still holding my coffee. "Megan is talking," he said. 4 words delivered with the precise economy of a man who understood exactly how much weight they carried. I set down my coffee cup with extreme care, as though the table beneath it had suddenly become unreliable. "When?" I asked. "She contacted the prosecutor's office Friday afternoon. Retained a separate attorney, not the one she and Ethan had been sharing, and filed for a cooperation agreement over the weekend." Richard's voice was measured, but I had known him long enough to hear the controlled energy running underneath it. "She is offering full disclosure in exchange for reduced charges. The prosecutor accepted the framework this morning." I walked to my kitchen table and sat down. My legs felt the way they sometimes did after physical therapy, functional but slightly detached from the rest of me operating on their own authority. "What did she tell them?" I asked. "Everything." The word landed like something placed with deliberate force. "Walter, she gave them the complete architecture of the operation. The client acquisition process, the pricing structure, the authentication certificate forgery process, the communication protocols. She described in detail how she sourced the forged items, how she identified collectors with enough money and enough enthusiasm to be vulnerable, and how she managed the paper trail to obscure the origin of funds. A pause. She also confirmed that Ethan knew from the beginning that he was not a passive participant, that the gambling debts were his, that the scheme was proposed as a solution to those debts, and that he was fully aware every book they sold was counterfeit. She's trying to separate herself from him, I said. She's trying to survive, Richard said without judgment. It's not personal. It's the calculation that people in her position make when the alternative is worse. He paused again, and I recognized the quality of this particular pause. It meant he was coming to something he had been saving. Walt, there's something else. Something I found in the financial records that I haven't told you yet, because I wanted to verify it before I said it out loud. My hand tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked faintly. Tell me. In the documentation Megan provided, there are 3 legal certificates attached to specific high-value sales. Certificates of provenance and authentication, the kind that collectors require for items above $10,000. These certificates carry a signature. Richard's voice slowed and became very deliberate. The signature reads Walter Hayes. Authenticated by Walter Hayes' 32 years of professional expertise in rare books and collectibles. Another pause. Walter, you did not sign those documents. The kitchen went very quiet around me. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Somewhere above me, a door closed with a soft, ordinary click. He forged my signature, I said, on 3 legally submitted documents used to facilitate fraud transactions totaling $62,000, Richard said. That is not a separate mistake or an escalation of the existing scheme. That is an independent felony. Forgery of a signature on a legal instrument in Ohio carries up to 18 months per count. 3 counts. His voice tightened by a fraction. He used your name, your career, and your signature to commit a crime, and then he stood in a police interview room and told a detective that the crime was your idea. The trembling started in my hands and moved upward through my arms and settled somewhere in my sternum where it sat like something vibrating at a frequency just below what I could fully process. I pressed both palms flat on the kitchen table, the cast on one, the bare skin of the other, and breathed deliberately the way the physical therapist had taught me, in through the nose and out through the mouth, slow and counted. How long have you known? I asked, when I trusted my voice. I confirmed it this morning before I called you. I wanted to be certain. A brief pause. Walt, I need to ask you directly. Is there any version of events in which you might have signed something without fully understanding what it was? Any document Ethan brought to you in the past 18 months? No, I said. Nothing. I have signed nothing connected to Ethan or Megan or any business in more than 2 years. That's what I believed. The signature analysis will confirm it. I'm having a forensic document examiner look at all 3 certificates today. But the fact that Megan's disclosure includes these documents with no attempt to omit or minimize them tells me she is not protecting Ethan anymore. She has given us everything, Walter, including the things that implicate him most severely. I thought about Megan at the hospital doorway with her exercise clothes and her phone and her rapid, precise calculation. The stage manager. The architect. I had underestimated her in one direction. I had not imagined she would build something so sophisticated. And now I realized I had underestimated her in another direction entirely. When she decided to walk away from something, she walked away completely, and she did not look back, and she did not leave Ethan anything to stand on. What does this mean for the overall case? I asked. Between the video, Noah's testimony, Megan's cooperation agreement, the financial records, and now the forged signatures, Walter, there is no version of a defense that holds. Ethan's attorney knows it. I expect a plea negotiation within 2 weeks, possibly sooner. Richard exhaled slowly. The forgery charges alone changed the conversation significantly. This is no longer just a fraud case with an assault attached. This is a man who committed forgery against his own father in his own father's name, while his own father was trying to warn him to stop. I looked out the kitchen window at the Columbus November sky. The particular flat gray of Midwest winter arriving, the trees stripped down to their actual shapes. No leaves left to soften anything. "Richard," I said, "when Ethan finds out Megan has cooperated, what is he going to do?" "He's going to be frightened," Richard said. "Genuinely, fully frightened, possibly for the first time in this entire situation. And frightened people," he paused, "sometimes reach for the only thing they have left, which in Ethan's case is you." My jaw tightened until I felt it in my back teeth. "Let him reach," I said. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. The coffee was cold. The November light was gray and flat and honest in the way that November light always is, stripping away everything decorative and leaving only what is actually there. 35 years. That was how long I had been the thing Ethan reached for when everything else failed. The safety net, the bailout, the man who would absorb whatever damage his choices produced and hand him back a clean surface to start over on. He had forged my name. He had put my signature on his crimes and then told a detective the crimes were mine. And somewhere in the calculation that had produced those decisions, I knew was the absolute bedrock certainty that I would find a way to make it stop, that I would protect him, that I always had and therefore always would. I picked up my phone. I looked at Ethan's name in my contacts for a long moment. Then I put the phone face down on the table and stood up and went to make fresh coffee, because some things could not be resolved by staring at them, and some debts, no matter how long a father had been carrying them, eventually had to be returned to the person who made them. Richard had warned me it would go public. He had said it clearly in the careful way he delivered things. He wanted me to actually hear, rather than simply register. I had nodded and said I understood. What I had not understood, what no amount of preparation could have fully prepared me for, was the specific sensation of sitting in my apartment on a Tuesday morning in mid-November and watching my name scroll across a local news ticker on my laptop screen. Columbus fraud investigation. Rare book operation targeted collectors in 6 states. Suspect Ethan Hayes, 35. Allegedly used father's professional reputation to authenticate forgeries. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the laptop and called Richard. He picked up immediately. "I saw it," he said. "I was about to call you." "How bad is it?" My voice was steady, which surprised me. Manageable. His tone was firm and reassuring without being dismissive. "The statement I issued this morning is already being picked up alongside the original story. Every outlet running the piece is including the clarification that you are a victim in this investigation, not a participant. Your name appears because Ethan used it. That is the story, and the story is accurate." A brief pause. "Walt, the FBI formally joined the investigation this morning. When fraud crosses 6 state lines, it triggers federal jurisdiction automatically. This is no longer Detective Reyes working a local assault and fraud case. This is a federal matter now." My throat tightened. Federal. The word had a weight to it that local never quite achieved. "The collectors," I said. "How many?" 47 confirmed victims across Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Ohio. Total documented losses of $231,000. Richard's voice was precise and controlled. Among them, a retired literature professor from Boston who paid $19,000 for a Faulkner first edition, a private library in Chicago that purchased what they believed was a signed Steinbeck for $26,000, and a collector in Manhattan fairly well known in those circles who bought 3 separate items over 8 months for a combined total of $51,000. Each number hit me somewhere separate and specific. 47 people. 47 collectors who had saved and researched and believed they were acquiring something genuine, something that would outlast them, something worth caring for. And they had trusted a name, my name, and paid for lies with money that represented real years of real work. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown Columbus number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. Richard heard it. "Reporters," he said. "Do not answer any number you don't recognize today. If anyone gets through 2 words, no comment. Everything goes through me." Understood. The phone buzzed a 3rd time and I turned it face down on the table. "Richard Ethan, has he been formally charged?" His attorney and the federal prosecutor met this morning. The charges being prepared include wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery of legal documents, and assault causing bodily harm. His attorney is negotiating, but with Megan's cooperation agreement and the federal evidence package, the negotiating position is not strong. A pause. He was suspended from his job 2 days ago when his employer saw his name in the preliminary coverage. The suspension will become termination within the week. I'm told it is already decided internally. I stood up and walked to the window. The November street below was gray and ordinary, a mail carrier moving from house to house, a woman walking a dog, a city conducting its business without any awareness of what was unraveling on the 14th floor of a building on North High Street, and in a federal prosecutor's office, and on the screens of 47 people in 6 states who were learning that something they had trusted was never real. Richard. I pressed my hand flat against the cold glass. My name is going to be in this for a long time, isn't it? Even after it's resolved. Yes, he said, without softening it. But Walt, listen to me carefully. In 6 months, the story people remember is going to be the father who was defrauded and assaulted by his own son. Not the fraud itself. The human story always outlasts the legal summary. His voice shifted into something quieter. You didn't do anything wrong. Not one thing. And that is going to be evident to anyone who looks at this honestly. I nodded at the window, even though he couldn't see it. The mail carrier had finished the block and was moving around the corner unhurried and methodical, doing the same work, the same way, regardless of what was happening inside any of the houses on the route. What do I do today? I asked. Nothing, Richard said. Today you let the system do what systems are built to do. You have given it everything it needs. Now you wait. After I hung up, I sat in my chair and watched the November street for a long time. 47 people. My name on their receipts for things that were never real. The particular grief of that, not anger, not shame, but grief, settled across my shoulders like something physical. Like weather, like the specific weight of a thing you cannot fix but have to carry anyway until the carrying is done. Thanksgiving came and went without a phone call from Ethan. The first time in 35 years. I made myself a turkey sandwich from the deli down the street, poured coffee from my own machine, and sat at the kitchen table listening to the family in the apartment next door, children's voices, laughter, someone dropping something metal in the kitchen. The particular warm chaos of a full house at the holidays. It was louder than I remembered full houses being. Or maybe I had simply been alone long enough to notice the difference. Richard called the following Monday. Ethan's attorney reached out this morning, he said. Ethan wants to meet with you. He says he has something he needs to explain in person. I looked out the window at the late November street stripped bare and gray. Where? I suggested my office, neutral ground, and I'll be present for the entire conversation. A pause. Walt, you don't have to do this. Not yet. Not ever if you choose. I'll be there, I said. Ethan was already seated when I arrived at Richard's office that Wednesday afternoon. I almost did not recognize him at first, and that stopped me in the doorway for a fraction of a second. The man sitting in the chair across from Richard's desk was wearing a collared shirt that was not quite pressed with the particular exhaustion around his eyes of someone who had not slept properly in weeks. The elevated chin was gone. The practiced composure was gone. What was left was just a 35-year-old man who looked for the first time in longer than I could remember his exact age. He looked up when I came in, and his jaw tightened, and his eyes went bright in a way that I recognized not sentiment, but the specific rawness of someone who has been stripped of the things they used to manage their feelings with. Dad. His voice came out rough and lower than usual. To Ethan. I sat down in the chair beside Richard's desk, angled slightly toward my son. I kept my hands loose in my lap, my breathing, even my face, as neutral as 35 years of being his father would allow, which was not entirely neutral, but was the best I could manage. I know you don't owe me this, Ethan said. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, turning his phone over and over in his hands, a nervous habit I recognized from when he was a teenager, a tell he had never managed to eliminate. I know that. I needed to say some things to you directly, and I couldn't do it over the phone. Say them, I said. He exhaled shakily. His hands gripped the phone tighter. The charges if you took back your statement. If you told them it was more complicated than they understand. That I was trying to help you, that there was a miscommunication about the business structure. His voice was cracking at the edges now, the controlled version of Ethan I had watched perform for years, giving way to something rawer underneath. Dad, they're talking about federal prison. They are talking about me going to federal prison. My chest ached with a dull, agonizing persistence that I had come to recognize as the specific pain of loving someone whose choices you cannot save them from. I looked at my son, at the exhaustion in his face, the fear in his hands, the 35 years of history between us sitting in the room like a third presence, and I felt the pull of it. The old, deep, almost gravitational pull toward stepping between him and consequence one more time. And then I thought about Gerald Hoffman on Devonshire Road, holding a package he had been waiting years for, saying, "You can't put a price on that kind of provenance." I thought about 47 people in 6 states. I thought about my signature on 3 legal documents I had never touched. Ethan, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Listen to me carefully. I have rescued you your entire life. From the failed business when you were 22. From the debt collectors at 28. From every corner you painted yourself into every time without exception. And every single time you came back and made a worse choice than the one before it. I leaned forward slightly. I am not taking back my statement. I am not telling anyone there was a miscommunication. Because there was no miscommunication. You know what you did. I know what you did. And 47 people who trusted my name know what happened to them. Ethan's face crumpled, not gradually, but all at once, the way things collapse when the last support is removed. His eyes went wet, and his chin dropped, and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, the way I had seen him do as a small boy, when he was trying very hard not to cry in front of someone. "You're my father," he said from behind his hand, his voice broken into pieces. "Yes," I said. The word came out quietly and without anger, because what I felt was not anger. It was something older and heavier and more permanent than anger. Which is exactly why I am not doing this anymore. You need to face what you have done, Ethan. For the first time in your life without me in front of you absorbing it. That is the only thing I have left to give you. Ethan pressed both hands over his face. His shoulders shook once a single suppressed convulsion, and then he pulled his hands down and breathed and looked at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and devastated, and more honest than anything I had seen on his face in years. "What about Noah?" he asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Noah is going to be fine," I said, "because Noah has never needed me to lie for him." Richard walked Ethan out 20 minutes later. I sat in the chair by his desk and looked at the wall of case files and the oak desk and the window overlooking North High Street, and felt the specific exhaustion of a man who has just done the hardest thing he has ever done, and knows with complete certainty that it was right. December arrived the way justice sometimes does, quietly without announcement, after so long a wait that you have almost stopped expecting it. Richard called on a Monday morning and said 4 words I'd been working toward for 4 months. "Walter, we have everything." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Outside, the first real snow of the Columbus winter was coming down in the particular unhurried way of snow that intends to stay. "Tell me," I said. "The federal indictment was filed this morning. Ethan faces 7 counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, 3 counts of forgery assault, causing bodily harm, and conspiracy." Richard's voice was steady and precise. "Megan's cooperation agreement is formalized. She receives reduced charges in exchange for full testimony. The forgery analysis confirmed all 3 signatures were fabricated. The forensic examiner's report is unambiguous." A brief pause. "Your name has been formally removed from any association with Meridian Collectibles in the federal record. The prosecutor's office issued a statement this morning identifying you as a victim. It goes out to every outlet that ran the original story." My chest expanded with something that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but lived somewhere between them. The specific feeling of a weight you have been carrying so long that when it finally lifts, your body does not immediately know what to do with the absence. "Thank you, Richard," I said, "for all of it." "You did the work, Walt," he said. "I just made sure the right people saw it." After we hung up, my phone rang again. "Ethan." I looked at his name on the screen. My thumb hovered. Then I answered, because I had made a decision weeks ago about what kind of man I intended to be at the end of this, and that man picked up the phone. "Dad." His voice was hollowed out, not the rawness of the meeting in Richard's office, but something deeper. The voice of a man who has reached the floor and found it solid beneath him and is learning what that means. I don't have anywhere else to turn. I know that's not your problem anymore. But I needed to hear your voice." My throat tightened so sharply that for a moment I could not speak. My eyes burned, and I pressed the back of my good hand against my mouth, the same gesture I had watched Ethan make in Richard's office, the same gesture I had seen on his face when he was 7 years old and had broken something he loved by accident and could not explain why he had been careless with it. "I hear you," I said when I trusted my voice. "I'm here. Please." The word came out cracked and small, the way a grown man's voice goes when he has run out of everything else. "Dad, please. I can't do this without you." My heart broke then, not for the first time in this long season, but in a way that felt final, like the last stone in a wall giving way. I loved my son. I had loved him every single day of his 35 years, including the days he made it nearly impossible. I loved him in that moment, with an ache so complete it was almost indistinguishable from grief. "So, Ethan," I said. My voice was quiet and certain and sadder than anything I had said to him in 4 months. I know what you're asking me to do, Ethan, and I know why you're asking. Because it has always worked before. My voice came out steadier than I expected. But I am not the door this time. There is no door. What you built with my name and without my permission, and 47 people paid for it, with money they earned honestly. I cannot undo that for you. Nobody can. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then Ethan's voice, barely audible. What about Noah? Noah is going to be fine, I said. He has people around him who tell him the truth. That is the only thing a child actually needs. Another long pause. Then, okay, Ethan said. Just that. One word, low and exhausted and stripped of everything except the bare fact of it. After he hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The snow outside had thickened, covering the street, in a clean, undifferentiated white that made the whole neighborhood look like something that had not yet been written on. Then my phone rang again. Noah's number. I picked up immediately, and my face did something it had not done in months. It broke into a genuine, unguarded smile, the kind that arrives before you can prepare for it. Grandpa. His voice was bright and ordinary and 6 years old, and the most beautiful thing I had heard all year. Are you okay? Mom said you've been having a hard time? I'm okay now, buddy, I said and meant it completely. I really am. Can I come see you soon? Anytime you want, I said. Anytime at all. On the 23rd of December, I put on my jacket, picked up my delivery bag, and walked out to the garage for the first time in 3 months. The cold hit me the way Columbus cold always does in late December. Clean and immediate, no negotiation, the kind of air that makes you feel the exact edges of your own body. I stood in the garage doorway for a moment and let it settle against my face. The van had been serviced while I was recovering. The delivery company had held my route. My supervisor, a methodical man named Gerard, who communicated almost entirely in logistics, had sent one text during my entire absence route, waiting when you're ready. No rush. That was Gerard's version of warmth, and I had appreciated it more than he would ever know. I checked the new cast lighter than the first one. The doctor had said 2 more weeks, and it would come off entirely. I ran my left hand along the roof of the van, the familiar cold metal of it, and felt something in my chest settle like a key, turning in a lock that had been stuck for a long time. Frank Delacroix appeared over the fence, coffee in both hands, exactly as he had been on the morning this all began. Walt. He squinted at the cast, then at my face. You look different. Different how? I asked, pulling open the van door. Lighter, he said after a moment. Like you put something down. I thought about that. Yeah, I said. I think I did. Frank raised his coffee mug in a small salute and went back inside, and I climbed into the van and started the engine and pulled out of the driveway into the December morning. The city was different. This close to Christmas, slower, more distracted, the particular gentle chaos of people who are almost somewhere they want to be. I ran my morning route with the careful, unhurried attention I had always brought to it, and somewhere around my 8th delivery, I realized I was not thinking about Ethan or the case or the federal indictment or any of it. I was thinking about the address on my scanner and the most efficient way to navigate the next 3 blocks, given the construction on Broad Street. I was for the first time in 4 months simply doing my job, not because I had no other choice, not because I was too old or too broken or too invisible for anything else, because this was the work I had chosen with no one requiring it of me and no one benefiting from it except the people waiting for their packages and myself. That distinction between a life lived on your own terms and a life lived in service of someone else's comfort was one I had spent 60 years learning the hard way. By 2 in the afternoon, I was parked outside Riverside Elementary waiting. The same brick building, the same flagpole, the same mural of children reading books along the side wall. 3 months ago, I had stood in this parking lot with a broken arm and a heart full of things I could not yet say. Today I sat in the driver's seat of my own van cast, and all with the engine idling and the heater running and nothing waiting for me at home except my own quiet and my own coffee and my own undisturbed sleep. Noah came out of the front gates at 3:15, backpack, bouncing, scanning the parking lot with the focused intensity I recognized from every time he was looking for one specific face. He found mine through the windshield, and his whole body lit up, arms wide, running the purest version of joy I knew how to describe. I got out of the van, and he hit me at full speed, and I caught him with my good arm and held on. "Grandpa, you're back. Are you driving again?" "Starting today," I said, my voice rough with something I did not try to name. He pulled back and examined me with the grave, thorough attention of a 6-year-old conducting a medical assessment. "Does your arm still hurt?" "Less every day," I said. "Good." He nodded with great seriousness. Then, squinting up at me, "Grandpa, what do you want for Christmas?" I looked at him, this small, straight-backed, grave-eyed boy with his crooked backpack and his grandmother's stubbornness written all over him, and felt my chest fill with something so complete and uncomplicated that it took me a moment to identify it. Not relief, not the absence of pain, something older and simpler than either. "I already have it," I said. He took my good hand. As we walked to the van, his small fingers wrapped around mine, and we moved through the December afternoon, together, an old man and a 6-year-old boy, the city going quiet around us, as it does on days when something has finally, after a long and difficult journey, arrived, where it was always meant to be. Ethan had given me a choice he believed would break me. He thought if he took enough away, I would have nothing left worth standing for. But he had always misunderstood what I was standing for. It was never the books. It was never the reputation. It was never the name on a business that no longer existed. It was the right to walk out of my own garage on a cold December morning and feel without qualification or apology that the life I was living was mine. Nobody handed that back to me. I took it back myself. One delivery, one honest day, one small hand in mine at a time. If there is one thing this season taught me, it is that silence is not the same as peace. I stayed quiet for too long, not out of weakness, but out of love. And love, when it has no boundaries, stops being a gift and becomes a permission slip for the people who take it for granted. I am a family justice story that almost never got told. Not because the truth was hidden, but because I kept choosing to protect the person who needed to face it. Don't be like me. Don't wait until your arm is broken and your name is on someone else's crime before you understand that protecting people from consequences is not kindness. It is the slowest way to lose both them and yourself. I believe with everything I have left at 60 years old that God does not ask us to carry what belongs to someone else. He asks us to be honest, to be patient, and when the time comes, to let go. That is the hardest kind of family justice there is. Not the kind that punishes, the kind that finally tells the truth and trusts the truth to do its work. My personal belief is simple: a revenge dad does not go looking for payback. A real revenge dad just stops absorbing the damage and lets reality speak for itself. That is the only revenge worth having. That is the revenge dad I chose to become. If this story landed somewhere real for you, leave a comment below and tell me what you felt. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that family justice and human dignity are worth fighting for, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories coming, and every one of them matters. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the very last word. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. If this kind of content is not for you, we respect that completely. Step away and find what serves you best. But if you stayed this long, something in this story was meant for you.